Hi students, good morning. Last class we discussed about the different modes of reproduction by single organisms. Today let us study sexual reproduction. In a sexual mode of reproduction, only one parent is involved. But in sexual reproduction, two parents are needed, one male parent and one female parent. But exceptions are there in the case of bisexual organisms, that is, male and female reproductive parts are present in the same individual. Then there only one individual is involved. Okay. Normally in sexual reproduction, two individuals are involved. Okay. And in the beginning of the chapter, I told you the creation of a new cell involves DNA copying along with the creation of new cellular apparatus. But during DNA copying, small changes happen, and these small changes are known as the variations. These variations are very much helpful for the survival of the species rather than the individual. And during sexual reproduction, these two individuals with different variations combine, and it results in the formation of a new individual with the combination of variations. So that new individual with new variations, it can better adapt it in that particular environment. So the main advantage of sexual reproduction is it brings about the variations. But it creates a difficulty, it creates a problem. If the new generation is to be a combination of DNA copies of two individuals, it will end up in an organism having double the number of chromosomes, double the amount of DNA. So how to solve this problem? Here in multicellular organisms, there are special cells called germ cells, reproductive cells. These reproductive cells contain only half the amount of DNA, only half the number of chromosomes than the non-reproductive body cells. For example, human beings have 46 chromosomes, but the germ cells contain only 23. So, 23 chromosomes of the male combines with 23 chromosomes of the female germ cell, then the resultant will have the full set of chromosome. So, the chromosome number can be maintained generation after generation. Okay. In simple organisms, both the germ cells, reproductive cells are almost similar. But in the case of higher organisms, complex organism, one germ cell is somewhat bigger, which stores food material, and it is known as the female gamete. While the other germ cell is somewhat smaller and normally motile, that is known as the male gamete. Now let us study the sexual reproduction in flowering plants. You all know flower is the reproductive organ of the plant. Flower consists of male and female reproductive parts in it. So first let us study which are the different parts of the flower. Okay. So here you can see the flower and observe which are the different parts. So the first part you can see as this green color part. What is it called? These are the sepals. Okay. And now you can see a colorful part also. These colorful structures, that is known as the petals. Okay. Now, the another one you can see as these small yellow structures. These are the stamens. That is the male reproductive part of the flower. These stamens consist of two parts. The first bulb-like part, that is known as the anther, and a thin structure known as the filament. So, anther and filament together known as stamen, which is the male reproductive part. Okay. Now you can see one more structure, that is the female reproductive part. This is known as the pistil or carpel. It has 3 parts. You can see the 3 parts. The first part, this is known as the stigma. Then you can see a white thread-like part called the style and a bulb-like part called the ovary. So stigma, style and ovary forms the female reproductive part called carpel or pistil. Okay. Inside the ovary, you can see ovules contain the female gamete called the egg. The anthers, I told, that is the male reproductive part which produce the pollen grains that carries the male gamete in it. Okay. And here in this flower, you can see both male and female reproductive parts. Such flowers having both stamens and carpel is known as bisexual flower. Example, hibiscus, mustard, etc. In some flowers like papaya, watermelon, etc., they are having either male part or female part, either stamen or carpel. Such flowers are known as unisexual flowers. Okay. And you know, the male gamete is produced by the pollen grain and the female gamete is inside the ovary. For fertilization, both of these gametes should meet each other. So, the pollen grain should be transferred to the female reproductive part. And that process of transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of the flower is known as pollination. Okay? Sometimes the pollination takes place between the same flower. The pollen grains of the flower transport to the stigma of the same flower. That condition is known as self-pollination. In some other cases, the pollen grains are transferred between different flowers. That is known as cross-pollination. Animals, water, wind, etc. help in cross-pollination. These are the agents of cross-pollination. Okay. And this pollination leads to fertilization. Now let us study how pollination leads to fertilization. Okay. Here, suppose this is the stigma, then style, and this is the ovary. You know, these are the parts of female reproductive system. What is it? It is the stigma, the first part of the female reproductive part, that is carpel. The first part of the carpel is stigma. Then what is it? It is the style, and this part is the ovary. Okay. Inside the ovary, you can see the egg cell. So here you can see the egg cell. This is the egg, female gamete. Okay. So when the pollen grains falls on the stigma, suppose this is the pollen grain, these are the pollen grains. Okay. If it is of the right species, these pollen grains develop a tube, and this tube is known as the pollen tube. This pollen tube grows through the style, okay, and finally it reaches the ovary. It reaches the ovary, and inside this pollen tube there are two male gametes. This is the male gamete. Okay. Now, there are two male gametes I told. One of the male gametes fuses with the egg. And this fusion of male and female gamete is known as fertilization. Okay. So, fusion of male and female gamete takes place. That is known as fertilization. This fertilization results in the formation of zygote. This zygote undergoes continuous division and it produces the embryo. The ovule gradually develops a tough coat and it becomes the seed, whereas the ovary grows in size and ripens to form a fruit. Meanwhile, other parts of the flower like sepals, petals, stamen, style and stigma fall off. But in some fruits like tomato, we can still even in the ripened fruit we can see the parts of sepals. The seeds contain future plant or embryo inside it. Under appropriate conditions, it develops into a new plant. This process is known as germination. Okay. You take some Bengal gram or pea seeds soaked in water overnight and in the next day you can observe. Outside you can see a seed coat. Remove the seed coat and open the seed. Then you can see parts like this. You can see two parts like this. These are known as the cotyledons. You know, Bengal gram or pea seeds, these are dicot seeds. So, two cotyledons you can see, which stores the food material. Here, one more structure you can see, a structure like this inside. This is known as the embryonal axis. Embryonal axis. Okay. It has two parts. The upper part is known as the plumule. The basal part is known as the radicle. Okay. This plumule later develops into the shoot, whereas the radicle develops into root. Okay. That is all about the pollination and fertilization. This topic is very important. Study everything.